Hey guys, so welcome to the cooking up of a storm of vegan bao buns. All right, so for you guys at home, cooking up bao buns requires a lot of time and effort. So follow along with the recipe, make sure that you get your bao buns done a few hours before your guests arrive. Otherwise, you're gonna have chaos in the kitchen and probably white bread. All right, so first off, we've had great support today from the International Hotel School. They've done a phenomenal job today, making sure that chefs like myself have what we need to make this experience for you at home fantastic. So we are making bao buns with king oyster mushrooms, right? So oyster mushrooms at the moment are in season as well, and they do just as well, and they're fantastic. And I'm going to talk you through how one of the chefs that I follow, the Sarno brothers from Wicked Health, they have a fantastic way of cooking up mushrooms, which I'll take you through in a second, using cast iron pans. Now, if you don't have cast iron pans and you only have one cast iron pan, you can also use a pot and MacGyver style it. All right, so we've got the trumpet mushroom, otherwise known as the king oyster. In line here, we've got all of our ingredients recipe, which you can follow along with at home. But I just want to also specify that we're using two types of misos here today. Now, for those of you at home that have maybe only ever experienced miso in a Japanese or Asian restaurant, it's probably miso soup. And that's what that deliciousness is. It starts out as a paste. It's from fermented soybeans. This one that we're using here is hacho miso, and hacho man is miso that's just straight from fermented soybeans. There's no grains in this, so if you're struggling with grains on the stomach at the moment, this is a good one to use. Also important on this spectrum of ingredients, and you'll see I've listed it in the ingredients list, mushrooms, the aubergines, the greens, and the festive berries, which we'll get to in a second. I'm quite excited about those. This is sesame oil, just adds another smoky flavor to this Asian-inspired dish. So bao buns, interestingly enough, are Taiwanese street food, and you could almost imagine them to be tacos, right? The tacos of Taiwan. All right, we've got aubergines, eggplant, sometimes not everybody's favorite, but if cooked properly, fantastic. And we're gonna glaze this one today with a white miso. Now, white miso is slightly sweeter in flavor and taste. Still soybeans have been used here, and we're also using rice in this one to get the flavor profile. A lot of umami. Now, this is probably going to be the hashtag keyword of the entire vegan festival that we're experiencing. Umami is a big thing, especially from a plant-based eating lifestyle point of view, because meat naturally has umami to it. So we have to find ways to put that umami back into the dishes that we create. And miso is one of those easy ways to do it. Also, things like fermented foods is another good way. And using things like soy sauce or tamari. If you're on a gluten-free diet, you can use tamari. All right, so I'm not going to go into too much detail about those ingredients, but I do just want to say one more thing here before we get into cooking, because that's the fun part. We've got our friends from Fat Fox yogurt, coconut yogurt. We're going to use this to just tone down. There's going to be a lot of saltiness and umami happening in all of this. The mushrooms add umami. In our greens, we're going to add this yogurt to it, and we'll also then tart it up with some of these fermented berries. So what I've done is I've taken, if you're following along with the recipe at home, I've taken the specified amount of blueberries to the specified amount of salt, and you basically mix it in a bowl, leave it in a jar. Make sure that the jar is sanitized, and we all know very well how to sanitize these days. So sanitized jar, put that in the jar, make sure that you press it down. You can do your research on Google here. I'm not going to go into too much detail of how to ferment things, but make sure that you press it down with a sanitized rock or something to that effect, just to weight it down below the water level. Keep it in a warm environment for at least out of sunlight for at least 2 days with the jar slightly ajar, and you will then have fermented blueberries. Once you add it to the fridge, that fermentation process pretty much comes to a stop. So make sure that you follow along with the recipe to get the fermentation right. Because this is the festive vegan plant-powered show, we are going to add some festive spices to the plating. Now, plating is always the fun part, and it's the fun part to do with your family, especially over this time. It's been an intense year for us all, so getting the family together to enjoy this process of cooking. We all cook and we all eat because it's such a magical thing to do. So using these festive spices with some things like lime zest and lemon zest will just add to that festiveness of the entire dish. Okay, now before you get overwhelmed with all of these ingredients, sure, there's 4 parts to it, but once it gets going, once you've done your prep, it actually goes quite smoothly. It's just a matter of keeping an eye on all these elements. Okay, so let's get to it. Firstly, I've got our bao buns going in our steaming pot, and you can see they're starting to almost double in size. Fantastic, and you want to go for about 10 minutes, follow along with the recipe as well, but you see as soon as they're going to go about another quarter of the way, and then I'll actually get that off heat. Okay, all right, so next up we're going to get the aubergines going. They need at least 20 minutes to bake, and then at least another 5 minutes of grilling with the miso glaze on it to get the flavor profiles that we're looking for. All right, so all I'm going to do is cut it down the horizontal, and then I'm going to cut it down the horizontal once again, keeping in mind to always keep the fingers tucked in. And then from there, I'm going to take some of our oil. We've got our canola Be Well olive oil blend. Now you can also use some sesame oil if you'd like, but pretty much just go with a high, an oil that can handle a high heat. All right. Then we get all fancy with this, and we do a little bit of Picasso, just, oil that bad boy. All right, so just taking some care here to get the oil onto the skin of the aubergine, aka eggplant. All right, and then from there, I'm just going to pop that into the oven. The oven's at 180 degrees. I'm going to pop that into the oven on bake and let that go for 10 minutes. Be back in a sec. Okay, so next up, before we get cooking on the mushrooms, because I know you're all jonesing at the bit there to see what are we going to do with these mushrooms. So before that happens, what do we do with this Clear Spring miso? Now, there are a lot of miso brands out there, and like anything in this life, quality. When you pay for quality, you're going to get what you're really looking for. This brand from Wellness Warehouse, absolutely awesome. There's 4 different kinds of misos. As I've said, we're showcasing 2 here today. This is the white miso, so we're going for more of a sweeter flavor profile. And if there are any avid plant-based chefs out there that have been trying to make a vegan cheese, as we know, that's pretty difficult. This is a good way to go as well. This just adds a good flavor profile to creating a faux cheese. Okay, so I've got 1/3 cup going straight into a mixing bowl. I've got 4 teaspoons of grated ginger going into the mixing bowl. We've got a teaspoon about of soy sauce. Just a little bit of pepper. Then we've got some rice wine vinegar. If you don't have rice wine vinegar, apple cider vinegar will do. If you don't have that, any kind of vinegar will do. But if you're going for that authenticity, try get the rice wine or the kind of mirin style flavor of Asian vinegar. We're just going to mix all of this together, and then I'm going to add a little bit, probably about a tablespoon and a bit of water just to loosen it up a bit. Just make sure that you're not burning your aubergines because they can go quite quickly. So that's what we're going for there, just getting that glaze ready, and we're going to leave that off to the side for the aubergines. So after 10 minutes of baking, we're going to turn those aubergines. After the next 10 minutes, we're going to add that glaze, and we're going to add it to our higher heat for grill. Just checking on our bao buns here. All right, so we've got our bao buns ready. I'm just going to leave them off to the side, they're ready for us for plating, and just before plating, I'll add heat to that again to get them warm. Also, a trick that you can do is just put them onto a cast iron plate to get a little bit of a browning happening on it. Okay, so we've got that ready, we've got that going, we've got the aubergine going. Next up, mushrooms. What are we going to do with these mushrooms? All right, good question. I'm so glad you asked. Cast iron pan. Not playing tennis with that, too heavy. Right, so we need 2 of these. If you don't have cast iron pans, what you can do quite easily, you should have another pot just lying around the kitchen, you can use that on top of it. All we're doing is pressing the mushrooms. It's a great technique, as I mentioned, from the Sarno brothers. You can follow them as well and see all of the amazing stuff that they make with this technique. So I'm going to talk you through it very quickly. We're going to add some of our sesame oil to the pan, just let that coat a little bit. And then we're also going to make a very similar glaze to what we just did with the aubergine. We're going to make with the hacho miso. All right, so using all of the hacho miso, it's about a third of a cup again of the hacho. By now you got that song in your head, don't you? All right, you got some sesame oil, about 2 tablespoons. We've got a little bit of water just to loosen it up. And we've got some garlic, some diced garlic. You can mince it as well. We've gone ahead and diced this one. And just follow along with the recipe, but basically a teaspoon of diced garlic. If you're not a fan of garlic, you can omit that. You can add chili if you prefer, up to you. Next up, we're going to use some lime. When cooking, it's one of my favorite things to cook with, the acid, from the acid point of view. Lime, if you can get your hands on it, obviously it's seasonal. So we're using half a lime there. Again, lime and lemon, just be a little bit careful. You don't want to go overboard with too much of it. So start slow and add according to your flavor profile. Right, so we're just going to take that, making our other hacho glaze, garlicky hacho glaze. All right, so what I've gone and done with the trumpet mushrooms, king oysters, cut them into steaks. All right, now you can do this beautifully as well with oyster mushrooms. And what we're going to do is just place them in a fan on the pan, fan style, in the pan. All right, and then while that's happening, just going to brush, being careful not to obviously burn yourself. Obviously cooking with oil here, there's water, so the two don't really mix well. You can also do this beforehand. All right, now important here, we just want to get it searing. We want it to cook down slowly. That's the secret here. We don't want to hit it too high with heat and just expect it to be ready within a minute. We want to go for the good 10 minutes, 15 minutes with the mushrooms. So I'm just going to turn it down to medium heat. I'm going to take our second pan, just place it on top, and let that, you can hear it sizzling down, and it will just gently start to press that down. Okay. So in the meantime, let's go with our greens. And this makes it a little bit easier. If we start with the greens, we can just cut these down while this is going. So what I've got here is we've got some seasonal greens from Food Lovers Market. So we've got some beetroot leaves in there. We've got some julienne carrots. We've also got some endives, otherwise known as radicchios. And we've got different frilly types of lettuce. So we're just gonna, this won't get heated, okay? You can hear that's cooking away beautifully. So I'm just gonna slow that heat down a little bit. And I'm just gonna cut this up while all of this is happening, because this will create the base of our bao bun. Okay, that's going to create the base of our bao bun. And as mentioned earlier, now you can imagine if you've had miso before, both of these misos are quite salty. There's a lot of umami happening, high profiled flavors happening. So you want to just neutralize that a little bit with the coconut yogurt. That's what we're going to do with all of this. We're going to mix that all together. Okay, so we're going to check on this. Let's just turn these over. And as you'll see in the recipe, this is going, that's what we're looking for, starting to brown beautifully. We're going to add our glaze to the other side. As mentioned, giving it its full 10 minutes of glory just to cook and release all the flavors we want it to release. Put that back on. And then let's finish up on here before we head over to see what's happening with the aubergines. Last thing, a little bit of rocket, a little bit of basil. This is about 10 grams, 5 grams of each. You can add more if you feel like it. You can add some cilantro if you feel like it, otherwise known as coriander, dhania. Okay, mix all of that together. Now I'm just going to let that sit and we'll add the yogurt later. Okay, move all of these items off to the side. Just going to check on the aubergines for a second. There we go. Our aubergines have been cooking in the oven for about 20 minutes. We've obviously oiled them on both sides. Now we're going to add the glaze. You're going to brush on the glaze, the miso glaze, onto the aubergines. All right, so just taking care to get them all coated beautifully. The ginger will cook down in this next step. So with the next step, we're going to put this in the oven at grill for about 5 minutes so it can brown up, char grill. All right. Cool. So next step, let's just use the lappy. Next step, we're going to use our scallions, ready chopped up spring onions. I'm just going to chop them a little bit more here and add that to the dish. So get them almost to a fine dice. And because we're cooking them down, they don't have to look too pretty. You know, they're going to kind of char grill in the oven now. And then we're also going to add some of our sesame seeds. Just toast those a little bit in the oven with all of this. And we'll add the rest. So we'll do about a half now, and we'll add the rest in the next step. So let me put this back in the oven at grill for about 5 minutes. So we're at the point where we're almost ready to dish and serve. So we're going to start with a quarter cup, half a cup. Let's go with half a cup of the yogurt. So we're just going to add that. This was a 500 ml. This came from a 500 ml tub. So I'm going to go with about a half a cup, and you can see, you'll soon see how much more you need. Okay, so we're looking to get a little bit more of that yogurt into this. And because they're in season at the moment, I'm also going to add just a little bit of grated radish into this. And if you've got an Asian market close by, you can get one of the Asian radishes, Chinese radishes. You can add that. You can also change your green mix up here for some Chinese cabbage. Up to you. Try to keep it seasonal. Eat within your means and what's available. Okay, so that's all ready. The next thing we're going to add are our festive spices. So 1.5 teaspoons of our cinnamon into a mixing bowl. Next up, we're going to go with 1 teaspoon of coriander. So the big thing here, the big flavor profile that we're going for here is the nutmeg. That gives us that kind of Christmassy flavor, almost reminiscent of eggnog. Okay. So adding those. Next up, we've got some ground ginger. And lastly, in that awesome entourage of festive spices, we have about a half a teaspoon of cloves. So just follow along with the recipe there. You can add or delete a little bit according to your flavor profiles. We've got some lime zest, lemon zest. Now we're going to add this right at the end. That's going to add coloring to our plating. Right, so we're just going to give that a mix. Just make sure that you're getting rid of all of those lumps that potentially could have formed here. And of course, you can also toast these things in a pan, in a dry pan, like you would when you're creating an Indian dish. Toast the dry spices. That can just bring another flavor profile to this. But right now, there's so many elements. We'll just keep it to this, keep it simple there. Okay, so we're going to check on the aubergines. It's pretty much time for them. Be back in a sec. So our aubergines have been in there for about 3 minutes. They're toasting up beautifully. So let's chop them, let's dice them. And you can see already they've cooked beautifully through. Now this next part, by dicing them into cubes, they'll just start to release even more of their liquid and become a little bit crispier in our plating. All right, so we've chopped all of our aubergines up. And just place them into a bowl or straight into the pan where it will ultimately end up. Okay. Just wipe off the hands. Okay, so next part here, we're just going to add a little bit more of the lime over that. And then the last of your glaze you can add onto that, just mix it all together. Right, so that's what we're going for here with the mushrooms. Let's just turn these should be nicely blackened. Yep. You can just keep adding your hacho miso to this. Okay, let's keep that going for a second. All right, next up here, we're just going to add all of these elements of the aubergine back into the oven at grill for a few more minutes, let them crisp up a little bit. We've got the glaze over it, and we're going to add the rest of our sesames to toast. And all of our spring onions that are left, if there are any left, let's pop that back in the oven. At this point, we're pretty much ready with our mushrooms. Ah, look at that. Okay, so that's seared, blackened look that we were hoping for, we've achieved. The glaze of that hacho miso has really done its job. So just cut these into nice long strips. We're not going to cube them. We're just going to go with cutlets. Let's call it cutlets. Nice stripped cutlets. All right, so now it comes down to plating this deliciousness. Take your bao. First off, let's get a good amount of your yogurty greens in there. Okay, so we've got our toasted, grilled, glazed aubergines. Now up to you, you can toast them for a little bit longer if you'd like more of a blackened look to it, char grilled look, but these are cooked through beautifully, and the glaze is just going to add that wonderful umami flavor to it. So you're going to take about a tablespoon of this beautiful glaze, glazed eggplant, and then just adding your cutlet. And we can even be a little bit fancy and go sideways. Fancy. Okay. And then finding your best Omar's crockery. Now it's time to add the fermented blueberries. If you didn't get to fermenting your festive blueberries, kimchi would be fantastic. Pickled veg is fantastic. Whatever you can afford, whatever works for you. But try if you can, because they are still in season. Just get some of the blueberries. They're quite affordable at the moment. And this is just going to add a wonderful tart, fermented tartness to it. And yes, it will be fizzy, because that's the fermentation process. Okay, so I'm going to add that to it. And it wouldn't be our festive Bao Buns without our festive flavors. So let's go just a little sprinkle of the festive. Okay, not too much, just a pinch. And then you can also just add a little bit of your radish to that. Up to you. Some people don't like radish, that's cool. Leave it out if you don't like it. And again, this is just adding some color, a little bit of flavor to it, so don't go too much. That's probably a little bit too much. Just gonna go there. But you can see on top of that radish, just how the coloring and everything just pops together. And then if you've got some sprouts, you know, you're that kind of guy that's just had sprouts lying around, because that's what we do in a vegan world. We have all of these wonderful sprouts. You can just add that to your dish and tuck in and enjoy.